Alright people, welcome back to Conquer and Commander. This is Deck Tech featuring my Adamaro First to Desire deck. Now, Adamaro is actually the very first commander I ever used before I even knew what the format was about or how to play it or anything like that. And I was like, ooh, he's going to be really big really early, right? And he actually takes a decent amount of building around in order to get him working. He's obviously a Morrow variant, but he wants all your opponents, or at least one of your opponents, to have a big hand. Now, this deck was actually brought about because I posted a thread over on MTG Salvation forums, being like, "Hey, look at my YouTube channel or whatever," and basically I was just trying to pimp myself. But anyways, Nathan's here basically said, "Hey, please consider doing Adamaro." And admittedly, this was back in April, so it takes me a little while to get around to these. And he also asked for Melik, but I actually already did a Melik deck. But Adamaro, he was like, he well, he liked how harshly it can punish people with draw engines. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll go ahead and get around to it, and that's why I started. So thanks, Nathonies. I'm just gonna butcher that. Sorry, guys. So anyways, the deck list will be printed up on puremtgo.com. Go over there and check it out. It's obviously pretty artifact heavy, as you can see. But alright, so let's get back to Adamaro here. Adamaro has a problem in that you typically don't want your opponents to have a ton of cards in hand. So what you want to do is make it hurt them either when they have those cards in hand or keep them from playing what they have. So let's look at the two-step process. The first is filling people's hands up, and this is all viewed based on their converted mana cost. And before I get going, I'm going to take a look at the stats real quick here. And the stats show that the average CMC in this deck is 3.39, which is actually kind of high for me. And admittedly, like, the Blasphemous Act isn't really a 9 CMC spell, but this is still a high CMC deck. Alright, so let's fill people's hands up. How are we going to do that? Well, Anvil of Bogarden doesn't necessarily fill people's hands up, but it does mean that their hand sizes are not limited to 7 cards, which is nice. So the basics are Howling Mine, Wheel of Fortune, which obviously puts 7 more cards in people's hands. Temple Bell, which acts as like a Howling Mine, but I can choose when I can do it. Horn of Greed. Anytime people play land, they're going to have to draw another card. Font of Mythos is a double Howling Mine. And Shavnar Isle, actually. People can't resist taking free cards, so even though I get a 6 Trampler out of it, they're more than willing to take the cards that I give them. Memory Jar here fills up their hands temporarily. Storm Cauldron is a combination of filling up people's hands and mana denial. You do get to play 2 lands a turn, but it bounces a bunch of lands back to your hand, and it will increase people's hands. It's kind of a meaner card, but I needed it in this deck. And then that's it for forcing people's hands. Oh, and I think Mikokoro, Center of the Sea, is in here too. Let's see here. Scroll down. Scroll down. There we go. Oh, Wheel of Fate right there. That's another way to force people to draw. Yeah, and then there's Mikokoro right there. So, unfortunately, even though there's like 10 cards like that, you don't always draw into them. That's just something you've got to worry about. There is stuff like Staff of Nin, which helps you personally draw, but like I said, you're not always going to draw into it. Well, how are we going to keep people from playing all their stuff? Through a combination of land destruction and taxing to make it more difficult for people to cast stuff. So stuff like the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. This is an underrated card, and even though it doesn't tap for mana, it can make people spend mana in order to make sure that they keep their creatures and threats out on the table. It's really good against token decks as well. Let's see what else we got here. Alright. Another way to make them spend mana or tax people is through stuff like Sphere of Resistance. This hits everybody equally. And, for people that like to play a lot of spells during their turn, it can hurt them a lot. Winter Orb. People love to be able to untap. People hate Winter Orb with a passion. This deck is a little meaner than my typical deck, but it needs to be in order to, win, essentially. We also have some non-basic hate with Dwarven Blast Miner and Magus of the Moon, who is good at keeping people's cards in hands. What else do we got here? We've got... I think there's not really much else. Keldon Firebombers. Keldon Firebombers is awesome for those super ramp decks that we see a lot of. And it kind of resets them a lot of times. So I liked this a lot. Storm Cauldron I already kind of talked about. And that's that. Oh, Dragon Mage is another way to draw cards. But I never drew it in my entire... every game I played, I never drew it. Okay. Let's talk about some of my ramp by itself. We've got Soul Ring, Cold Steel Heart, Fire Diamond, Iron Mirror, Mind Stone, Star Compass. Star Compass is a goofy card that I never really played before this deck, but it ended up being alright. The problem with a lot of these is that they enter the battlefield tapped, which is kind of a pain in the ass. And I think that's really about it. Crucible of Worlds was in here because I decided to play with a lot of the fetch lands, including the panoramas as well, like Grixis Panorama and stuff like that, because I wanted to thin things out, if at all possible. Now, ways to make it hurt to draw really only come down to a couple different cards. The first is... Where are you? Molten Psyche. Especially when people have big hands, Molten Psyche can really hurt a lot. And I almost always have Metalcraft. It's not hard to get Metalcraft with this deck. The next is Diviner's Wand. Diviner's Wand not only pumps Adamaro, but it gives him evasion. And it ended up working out really well when I pulled it out. Well, there's Darksteel Ingot. And then finally, we've got Viceling, which ended up working out pretty well. Ebony Owl Netsuke, which there's a bunch of like Pauper's Cage and Miser's Cage kind of cards where it only deals 2 damage a turn, and I didn't think that was valuable enough. I thought 4 damage was worth it though. And then probably the best of them all was Psychosis Crawler. Because you're going to be typically drawing a decent amount of cards, the Crawler can help too. Alright, on top of all that, we've also got the Caged Sun variants with Caged Sun, Gauntlet of Might, and Gauntlet of Power. And the good thing about Gauntlet of Power and Gauntlet of Might is that most people don't play red. There's not a ton of red out there. So, they don't hurt you too much. I'm also playing with Solemn Simulacrum. Now, the deck has minimal recursion abilities, because that's not really Red's thing. It's got Goblin Welder, which ends up working out alright, and Elixir of Immortality to shuffle your library back, or your graveyard back into your library. On the other hand, your graveyard hate is limited to Relic of Progenitus. So, with those, we've more or less got our bases covered. One of the issues that comes up is that Adamaro doesn't really have evasion by himself. So we gotta kind of help him out either by making him hasty or by giving him some form of evasion. Both of these go about by equipment, using equipment. And the easiest one is stuff like Lightning Greaves. Lightning Greaves is a staple. I tried Ring of Valkus just because I wanted to make sure that Adamaro stayed big even if people's hands weren't always full, And trust me, there's going to be plenty of games where like people don't have many cards in their hand because they don't want Adamaro to be big. And I'm not 100% behind that card yet, but we'll see. We've also got Loxodon Warhammer. Life gain is important in this deck because people start targeting you. I've got Sword of Vengeance to give him haste and trample. Sword of Worn Peace, again, is good because it hurts people for having big hands, and it helps you out with a little bit of life gain as well. Tenza, again, trample and pumps him up a good amount, and it's cheap. And then Urabrask. I never drew Urabrask either. I played a decent amount of games with this, and I never drew it. But it'll give your guy haste, and it'll also slow your opponents down a little bit. That's the majority of the deck. Now, one thing you may have noticed that I didn't really discuss was destruction that wasn't land destruction. Oh, I forgot. Buried Ruin is another bit of recursion as well. And Hall of the Bandit Lord is another haste enabler. The deck is lacking on destruction. It really comes down to Blasphemous Act as your main creature kill spell. All is Dust is out there. Staff of Nin, I guess, if there's like little piddly guys. Steel Hellkite is all-purpose and good, and an artifact. And then it's Into the Core. That's your artifact removal spell. Honestly, that's it. I'm not gonna lie. There's not a ton of ways to kill things in here other than land. Oh, the Virashino Heretic is good at blowing up artifacts as well. Chaos Warp is another all-purpose removal spell, and it worked out pretty well. I tried to save it for commanders most of the time, but there was plenty of times when like somebody was playing Sword of Fire and Ice, and I just needed to get rid of it right now, and so I did. Finally, we have just our beaters. And you'll see that the creature count's only 18 in this deck. So we've got Ashling the Pilgrim. Oh, Mizium Mortars. That's another creature kill spell. Gosh, I guess I had more than I thought. I think, really, Torian Mauler. The good thing about Torian Mauler is that when people have a ton of cards in hand, you fully expect them to play a lot of cards. So the Mauler should get bigger. That's the idea behind it, at least. And then Mindclaw Shaman. Again, if people have a lot of cards in hand, they're not going to be able to play everything they want. Hopefully there's something good in there that they're holding back and you can play it. Godo is obviously just a good beater and can search up your equipment that you need. So the interesting thing about this deck, well, there's two things. First of all, I played this deck a decent amount, and I never ran into like a super draw deck, a super blue-based draw deck that had like a massive hand at any time. So that didn't really happen, and I was a little disappointed by that. However, there were a bunch of cards that I wanted to include. There was more like non-basic hate, like Ruination and stuff like that, that just didn't make the cut. Partially because Ruination didn't hurt everybody equally. There's a lot of people that like to play basic lands out there, and Ruination wouldn't do anything against them. And I knew that Winter Orb and Keldon Firebombers could hurt everybody equally, but Ruination was another one that wouldn't. There was another card that I really wanted to include, and that was Tunnel Ignis. Just to deal with ramp decks, because ramp decks are a problem, but I just couldn't find the room for this guy. He was something that I really wanted to stick in there, but I just couldn't. Anyways, that's the deck. It's not the most devastating deck in the world, but it's a little fun to play as long as you don't mind a little bit of land destruction. You know, people are fine with Winter Orb because they know that eventually somebody's going to remove it. People are fine with Keldon Firebombers usually because, again, you still leave them with 3 lands and they're not completely wiped out. If you push the land destruction a little harder, I think you would get to the tipping point where people would just start conceding. The way that the deck is built right now, you don't get automatic concessions as soon as something happens. As soon as you play the Winter Orb or the Fire Bombers or anything like that. Because they also know that you're playing stuff with like Font of Mythos. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a deck that was fun to play with and fun to play against. There are 39 lands in the deck. Occasionally I thought that wasn't enough. So I don't know if you wanted to try and get rid of something and add another mountain or something. I don't know. But the deck was fun. Adamaro is a goofy card. People are like, holy cow, that's weird. And then they see what you're trying to do, and it works out all right. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Stick around and watch some video games. Or watch some games. Thanks.